All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're kicking off an epic topographical tour across the massive subcontinent of India. When you look at the physical landscape of this region, you aren't just looking at dirt and rocks. You're looking at a dynamic, living blueprint that has actively shaped human history for thousands of years. Let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at India's major physical divisions: the mountains and plains, the ancient Peninsular Plateau, deserts, coasts and islands. And finally, we'll wrap up with why India's geography actually matters.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, India's major physical divisions. So we can actually break India down into 6 major physical features. We've got the Himalayan Mountains, the Northern Plains, the Peninsular Plateau, the Indian Desert, the coastal plains, and the islands. Honestly, having this many wildly different topographical zones within a single set of borders is staggering. It means that to really understand this country, you have to understand a patchwork of completely different environments, each playing by its own rules. Moving on to Section 2, the mountains and plains. Let's start way up at the top with those towering heights. Notice the term young fold mountains. When we talk about the Himalayan Mountains up in the north, I know it's super easy to assume they've just been sitting there since the dawn of time. But geologically speaking, these massive, imposing peaks are actually relatively new formations. They were literally created by land masses folding upward into the sky. And these mountains don't just form one giant wall of rock. They actually build downwards, stacking into 3 distinct ranges. Right at the very top, you have the Himadri, also known as the Greater Himalayas, which holds the absolute most extreme peaks. Then you step down a level, and you enter the Himachal, or the Lesser Himalayas. Finally, as the mountains taper off toward the flatlands, you hit the Shawalik Range. It's almost like a massive staircase. Now, why do these mountains actually matter? Well, they aren't just tall. They are absolutely crucial to the survival and functioning of the whole subcontinent. They dictate the flow of major rivers, acting like a massive water tower for the land below. They regulate the climate by acting as a colossal barrier that traps weather systems. And, historically speaking, they have offered unparalleled physical protection from the north. They're literally a natural fortress. So, as we descend from those towering Himalayas, we enter the northern plains. This region is an absolute agricultural engine, and it is fueled entirely by 3 massive rivers: the Ganga, the Brahmaputra, and the Indus. These 3 waterways flow down from the high altitudes, carrying life-giving water and minerals directly into the flatlands below. It really is a simple chain of cause and effect here. Those major rivers deposit sediment, which creates highly fertile soil. And what does incredibly fertile soil lead to? Massive, sustainable agriculture. When a region can reliably produce immense amounts of food, it naturally supports a very dense population. The northern plains are just a textbook example of how water completely shapes human settlement. Next up, Section 3, the ancient Peninsular Plateau. Now, as we move further south, things get really interesting. We step away from the river-fed plains and onto the hard, geological core of the country. And there's a really incredible juxtaposition here. India is home to both the young, dramatic, newly formed fold mountains up in the north, and simultaneously the absolute oldest landmass in the country down in the south. The Peninsular Plateau is ancient, acting as the absolute bedrock foundation of the subcontinent. This ancient plateau is massive, and we generally divide it into 2 main parts. In the northern section of the plateau, you have the Central Highlands, and stretching out across the southern triangle of the country, you have the vast Deccan Plateau. You can think of this oldest landmass as India's ancient vault. It's just packed with rich mineral deposits that are absolutely foundational for industry and development. Plus, it is renowned for its black soil, a highly unique and vital resource that makes this plateau incredibly productive in its own right, completely distinct from the river-fed soil of the northern plains we were just talking about. Let's shift gears for Section 4, deserts, coasts, and islands. Let's wander out west for a minute into much harsher territory before we trace the watery edges of the subcontinent. Contrasting sharply with the highly fertile plains and the mineral-rich plateau we just looked at, the Indian Desert, which is located largely in Rajasthan, presents a massive geographic shift. It is defined by sweeping sand dunes, critically low rainfall, and incredibly sparse vegetation. It's a harsh, unforgiving environment that forces life to adapt entirely differently than in the rest of the country.
All right, tracking back down to the edges, let's look at the coasts. There are stark structural differences framing the landmass depending on which side you're on. The western coastal plains are very narrow strips of land that sit right up against the Arabian Sea. But if you cross over to the other side, the eastern coastal plains are much wider and are heavily characterized by sprawling delta regions where those massive rivers finally empty out into the ocean. Finally, our geographical tour takes us off the mainland altogether. We can categorize the islands pretty cleanly by their surrounding oceans. In the Arabian Sea off the west coast, we find the Lakshadweep Islands. Over on the eastern side, out in the Bay of Bengal, we have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Why India's Geography Matters.
Okay, we've systematically explored all 6 major features, but let's pull all these pieces together for the big so what. Why does this matter? Well, if there's one key takeaway from this explainer, make it this. These physical features aren't just background scenery. They are the fundamental, unchangeable building blocks of India itself. The mountains, plains, and plateaus actively dictate the climate systems. They decide exactly where agriculture will flourish or fail. They push the population to settle in incredibly dense clusters. And ultimately, this landscape dictates the entire national economy.
And that leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder as we wrap up today. With geography shaping literally everything from agriculture to the economy, how will India's physical features dictate its future? As the climate changes and economies evolve, the ancient rules set by these mountains, rivers, and deserts are going to determine the path forward. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep looking closely at the foundations of the world around you.